Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Premier Pundit podcast. And once again, I'm joined by the fantasy doc Raj from 3CB Performance. How are you, Raj?
I'm doing very well, Ben. Yourself?
Very well, my friend. It's been a very, very busy weekend. Lots to talk about, lots to touch upon. And I want to address the elephant in the room to kick off this week's bite-sized podcast. And that is the number of muscular and soft tissue injuries that we've had reported this weekend. To give you a little bit of insight and understanding on where we're at, we're currently at 13 confirmed reported muscle injuries for game week 21 alone. Now, in terms of looking at the injury data, those soft tissue muscular tears and strains, those are the ones where medical teams feel or clubs are judged upon because inherently they're so-called, they're avoidable injuries. And if if players are breaking down, and then there's normally a mistake or there's an issue along the way. I mean, could you sort of outline some of the risk factors associated around, why so many players have been suffering these types of setbacks at this point in the season?
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest thing with these injuries is cumulative wear and tear and fatigue. And so, we're coming off, of course, a very busy period during the holiday season where players may not get injured, but they build up that fatigue. And then eventually it boils over into a soft tissue injury. The way I look at soft tissue injuries is if you imagine a bucket and drops of water going into the bucket, eventually it overflows. And that's, to me, is how oftentimes soft tissue injury, at least non-contact ones, occur. Players are now becoming fatigued. They're becoming tired. They're going into those yellow and red zones potentially. And then also the other side of the coin, teams are seeing where they are on the table. So now they might be pushing the players a little bit more, right? There's either higher intensity matches, or whereas early in the season, they may have been more conservative, they're now playing those key players, taking a little bit more risk, which then can lead to some of these soft tissue injuries. And then the other aspect is we're getting deeper into the season now, where if a player has a pre-existing injury from earlier in the season, now you may see some of that compensation manifest where they're kind of changing their movement a little bit to compensate for that previous injury, or their previous injury is now they're getting injured again, because we know, as you know, previous injury is the biggest risk factor for future injury.
Yeah, I mean, you touch upon a great point there, Raj, and particularly around the fact that previous incidents is a great indicator. And we see with Chelsea, one of the big omissions from Thomas Tuchel's squad this weekend was the absence of Hakim Ziyech. Now, first thoughts for everybody, he started in that first game, and he was omitted from the matchday squad altogether. We assumed, quite rightly, it turns out, that Hakim Ziyech was not in fact injured, but he was taken out of the firing line. The medical team, the sports science department, had flagged Ziyech as being in the red zone, and that he should, by no means, if he was to play more than 30 minutes in the game at the weekend against Burnley, then potentially he's at increased risk of injury. Are these conversations, do you think, going on at all clubs? And it's like you mentioned, is it a case of risk and reward? And it's fine for clubs like Chelsea, who have the strength and the depth within their squad to be able to rotate and bring other high status players in, where maybe, for example, somebody like Brighton, we've seen Joel Veltman and Alexi McAllister, both of those players subbed off with injury, but they're dealing with a lot smaller squads, and obviously they're fighting for, in the dogfight down in that relegation zone.
No, absolutely. This is where squad depth plays a big difference, being able to rotate players through and keep them out of that red zone. And of course, I talk about risk reward when it comes to players, like a tightrope. You have to walk that tightrope of what is too risky, what's the reward here, and that's very, very difficult part for medical and sports science teams, and also for coaches, because coaches more so, I think, than ever understand what can happen if a player gets injured. And stay out for an extended period of time. And so this just, I believe over the weekend, Mane was left out of the squad because he was in getting closer to that red zone as a precautionary. And Klopp said that, these little things, if you allow them to fester, can turn into a major, not a major injury, but a more overt injury.
Mm-hmm. And given the fact we have such a quick turnaround between game week 21 and game week 22, we have the FPL official deadline, which comes in at 4:30 Greenwich Mean Time on Tuesday. And we still have, we'll still have press conferences still to come. We'll have teams playing on the Wednesday, Tottenham playing on the Thursday, for example. And from a fantasy perspective, who are trying to maybe second guess and read between the lines of those players who have been flagged as potential injury doubt because of muscular injuries, would you expect those players to be available through the week?
I think it really depends on the type of injury. For example, with Ziyech, he has a history now with the hamstring injury, which we know are really sensitive. Some of those adductor injuries, calf injuries can be quite sensitive. For example, Kieran Tierney has now missed multiple games with some calf kind of niggles going on. So it really comes down to the specific muscle that they're dealing with. I think, like we mentioned, Ziyech in this case, him being held out completely is a good sign for him being able to potentially play this week.
Brilliant. And now I want to move across to last game week's major talking point, and that was Harry Kane. Harry Kane broke the hearts of many a fantasy manager, me included, when he was forced off at half time. What looked a pretty innocuous challenge initially, but Jose Mourinho come out and he said it wasn't the first challenge that caused the damage. It was the second challenge on the opposite ankle. And, when Harry Kane says he's injured and he cannot come out for the second half, we know it's fairly serious. From your observations, from video footage and what you've seen and read, are you able to offer any kind of insight into the type of injury that he may have suffered and a potential sort of timeline on his return to play?
Yeah, sure. So correct me if I'm wrong. The first was a contact from a tackle with Thiago, and it seemed like that was just a knock to the ankle. Painful, but you can get through that. The second, from my understanding, I think he was tussling for a ball in the air with Jordan. I think it was with Jordan Henderson.
Yeah, Jordan Henderson.
Yeah, and he turned that right ankle inwards, I believe. Right, I think it was the right ankle.
Yeah.
And he turned the right ankle inwards, and that can be. From when I first saw it, I thought it was relatively mild, but considering Kane's history with extensive ankle injuries, which can increase some laxity in the ankle, which then can lead to some more serious downstream effects. My understanding from the timeline to 3 weeks, potentially 2, as Mourinho said this morning, it sounds like a grade 2 ankle sprain, which typically has that 21-day return to play timeline. But as we've seen with Kane before, for better or for worse, he tends to really push his body. And so we will see how that pans out for him.
Yeah, Harry's pushing for game week 24, which would be the fixture after the FA Cup fixture. And again, you mentioned the point that I was going to bring up. Harry Kane has a history of ankle issues. And almost on one hand, that laxity in the ankle joint may have been to his detriment, but also could it may have helped in a way that if the ankle was fixed and solid, maybe as it should have been pre-injuries, then could that injury have been potentially worse, or maybe even resulted in an avulsion fracture because it's locked in that little bit tighter?
I think it depends. I mean, looking at how much it turned, which it really wasn't all that bad. In this case, I would have expected a grade 1, to be honest with you. So again, there's the kind of that, there's that push and pull. Yes, you have more laxity, so you have more give. And if it was a more severe turn and it's already lax, then yes, maybe it protects against a more severe ankle injury. But in this case, it looked like his previous ankle injury history, which makes you again more susceptible to future injuries. I think that might play a part in why he's experienced some greater symptoms here.
And do you think somewhere down the line there's a possibility that if these ankle injuries keep on occurring, there's a possibility that he may need surgical intervention just to really sort of make that joint solid again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two possibilities here. One is if that ankle ligament gets bad enough, they can do what's called a lateral stabilization for the ligament, where they kind of reconstruct the ligament. And then secondly, I think it's going to happen for him whether he's playing or not. He's going to need some work on that ankle joint, because I almost guarantee you his cartilage in those ankles is pretty messed up, for lack of a better medical term. Every time you sprain an ankle, plus the wear and tear of playing, all those knocks, right? It all leads to a lot of that cartilage, having defects in that cartilage, which can then create pain. And honestly, that might be playing a part in his pain response right now.
Cool. And finally, I want to touch upon a player from your team, Arsenal, Alexander Lacazette, suffered what initially looked like quite a serious fall, awkward landing in a challenge with Harry Maguire. Laid down for extensive treatment, looked fairly groggy, being walked off the pitch, and subsequently was taken to hospital for further tests. Now, fortunately, it looks as if those tests have came back all clear. Certainly nothing in terms of concussion-related symptoms. And Mikel Arteta said that Alexander Lacazette could actually be included in the squad on Tuesday evening. But of course, this weekend we see the implementation for the first time of concussion substitutes. I mean, from a medical standpoint, and is that a good move? Is it adequate? Would you like to see more? And how do you think that would affect those on-field decisions when assessing players?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good start. That's for certain. I think head trauma and injuries have been neglected for so long in the football world, where yes, you need to start, but there definitely needs to be done. Personally, I think the biggest thing is, how do you validly test someone for a concussion while they're on the pitch? You cannot. You need a quiet environment. It can take up to 10 minutes. So for me, I think I understand why they're doing a permanent sub. Really, I think a key thing is two key things. One, you need an independent neurologist, because there's a lot of pressure there is on medical staff affiliated with the team, right? They're still humans. So there's going to come some bias potentially into clearing a player who may not be ready. Now, if you have an independent neurologist, and the National Football League has done this quite well, they use an independent neurologist to make that assessment and then to make that decision, which takes it out of the hands of the team. And then secondly, I would try to push for a temporary sub, which allows you, let's say, a 10-minute period to assess that player. And if he's not concussed, you can bring him back on. In this case, because not every player who has a blow to the head has a concussion.
Yeah.
So in this case, I think that would be a better risk reward, because you can take the player off. If they're concussed, great, it becomes permanent. If not, you can bring them back on.
Yeah, superb, great. So it's a step in the right direction, but by no means we could do better.
Absolutely.
Listen, Raj, it's been absolutely superb chatting to you again. Please check out Raj on social media, very active on his YouTube channel. Links will be included in the bio in the content below. But for now, and until next time we speak to Raj, it's a bye from me.
Thanks for having me.